Shabbat Shalom. This week, with Yom HaShoah, right in the middle of the week, it's actually one of the most difficult weeks in the year for me. And I wrote something the other day that I sent to the entire congregation where I explained, and I hope you got it, I explained the idea that we shouldn't casually compare leaders to Hitler or nations to the Nazis. No matter how horrible they are, no matter how violent they are, we cannot draw an equivalency between the darkest time in Jewish history and modernity. I think that as horrible as people can be and leaders can be, or as good as they can be, they all occupy a specific place in history. And you cannot just transpose things from one place to the other. And in times of collective mourning, like Yom HaShoah, when we are profoundly hurt and bewildered by everything that happens around us, our memory actually becomes even more fragile than it usually is. Because we cry inside or physically at almost everything. I mean, I was watching the official ceremony for Yom HaShoah directly from Yad Vashem in Israel. I was watching it live on Wednesday morning. And you could see soldiers crying. Soldiers that were in battle in Gaza, witnessing the most horrific things, crying at the Holocaust memorial. This is what memory does to you when you're vulnerable. It brings you down to a level that it makes you confront your most basic fears. And it bursts you of all of your defenses. But even when we're beaten that low, we cannot forget the context of things. One of the things that I'm recently most worried about are the comparisons between October 7th and the Shoah. When people say, October 7th was a mini Holocaust. And by the way, I don't only hear that within the Jewish community, not only in America, but also in Israel. One of the blessings of modernity is that I can watch Israeli TV 24/7 these days. And one of the things that they have on TV, they have shows where they just argue over one another. It's unbelievable. It's like being in Tel Aviv, but on TV. And sometimes the ideas are radical. But sometimes they're expressing the ideas of the majority of the population, and you never know where things are going to fall. But I really do not like listening that October 7th was a mini Holocaust, or trying to compare it, or trying to compare the plight of the hostages in Gaza to Anne Frank hiding in a double door. They're different tragedies, horrific tragedies, but completely different contexts. And let me explain to you what I mean. The Shoah marked the lowest point in the history of the diaspora. I mean, there is no doubt that we were the victims not only of the Nazis, but of the entire world, including this country, that refused to bomb the tracks leading to Auschwitz. But don't let me digress too much, right? Let's go to the basic facts. The only country in the world that admitted refugees was the Dominican Republic. This is not an exaggeration. Everyone closed their doors. So there was not only no way of defending ourselves from the Nazis, there was nowhere to flee. There was nowhere to go. And that's what made that tragedy even worse. The Nazis were beasts, inhuman. But the rest of the world. And then October 7th cannot be compared. October 7th, a tragedy of unparalleled dimension, was not a product of being victims. We stopped being victims a long time ago, and it's a very important thing that we explain this to our children. We are not victims anymore. The narrative of victimhood only perpetuates the idea that we don't have a right to be sovereign in our nation, that we don't have a right to defend ourselves however we choose. We are no longer victims. And this I learned in a class with Tal Becker, who was one of the attorneys that represented the State of Israel at the International Court of Justice just recently. He is tremendous, and he explained this very accurately and very vibrantly. If we believe ourselves to be victims, we will never jump out of that place, of that dark place, where you think that Jews should always be watching out for wherever's going to fall, instead of being proactive in their own defense. And that mentality, by the way, produces all of those Jews who think that Israel has no right in doing what it's doing. October 7th was our own failure. They attacked our state that has an army and a government. We were not defenseless, nor are we now. We completely failed. The people who died on October 7th, the hostages in Gaza, it's our own failure. The Shoah is the failure of humanity. Two completely different things. You know, as I think about this, I think of the words of Emil Fackenheim, who so eloquently wrote that statehood comes at a tremendous cost. It does. Once you have a state, you can no longer cry foul when things don't go your way. You are responsible. And that's what breaks my heart, that only a few have taken responsibility for what happened in October 7, 2023. No one took responsibility for the Shoah. The Germans, it was the Germans, it was the Nazis. It was only some, the other ones had to do it or they will be killed. Nonsense. One of the most horrific things about human conscience is that we refuse to take responsibility. The Parashat that we read today, Parashat Shmini, is tremendously incisive. Nadav and Abihu bring a strange fire to the tabernacle, and they're consumed by that same fire by God. Why? There's so many explanations, but the one I actually understand better these days is that it was because of their arrogance. They thought they were better. They thought they could bring as much fire as they wanted. That they were okay to bring even more than was needed. That was not the case. And sometimes arrogance leads to failure. So I want you to really understand the difference of these two tragedies. You know, in the middle of the 20th century, Franz Rosenzweig, Hermann Cohen, Martin Buber, they all argued about what's the ideal Jewish condition. Zionism, understanding our history, diasporism, should we remain here? And all of these discussions still play around in our heads, even at this point in time. Because we are a people that really have seen everything. We have felt everything there is to feel. And yet, every time we're confronted with tragedy, like Salo Baron, that great Jewish historian, once explained, we cannot go back to the valley of tears. We have to say to ourselves, Jewish history is not a constant of tragedy. It is not. It is a constant of glory, of triumph. with some tragedy in between. And for us, tragedy is not just an earthquake. When tragedy strikes us, it's a tsunami. Because we are a reflection of humanity as a whole, which is one of the most difficult things to understand about our history. We as a people are about choosing life, not about dwelling in the metaphors of death. And when you belong to a people that chooses life, you belong to a people that chooses to defend herself. When I hear people say, because I am Jewish, because I have suffered, because my grandparents were Holocaust survivors, I can't believe what's happening in Gaza. I literally want to jump off the ship. And I have no other expression. What has happened to these people's brains and souls? It is exactly the opposite. We cannot live in that lachrymose state. Or else, really, we will not be here tomorrow. If never again really means never again, it also means understanding our history and our story. And the only way to honor the victims of the Shoah, the true way to honor them, is by honoring their memory, by showing them that we can defend ourselves, that we are sovereign in our own state, that we have self-determination, that our children do not need to flee anymore, that our children do not need to cower behind the double door anymore. And if it happened at some point in the last decade, then it's absolutely our failure. It's not Hamas. We know where they live, we know who they are, we know what they do. It is us who let our guard down. 1.5 million Jewish children couldn't put their guard up. 1.5 million Jewish children in the Shoah, how could they defend themselves? But we have the Tzava Haganah Israel, the IDF. And all of those soldiers that I saw crying on Yom HaShoah, I'm sure they were crying not only because of the victims of the 6 million, but also because of our own failure to prevent tragedy again. So, dear friends, the echoes of the Holocaust, the echoes of the Shoah, the wind that we still feel sometimes. When I think of my wife's family, and we think of her grandmother who had 12 sisters and one brother, she was the only one that survived. I mean, we all have stories like that. We owe it to them to tell them never again. Really, seriously, means never again. And not only it means watching that it doesn't happen to others, but it means taking and assuming the responsibility of the defense of our own people seriously. Shabbat Shalom.